want to talk just briefly about the second reading before we go into the gospel. One of the things that St. Paul talks about is that it is access to that right relationship with God is through faith, that believing that God exists, but not only having that belief, but also that strong belief that then translates itself into action. And so one of the things we see is that grace, while we were still sinners, that Christ died for us. So that access to that grace is through faith. One of the things that William Barclay, who is a professor of, he's now deceased, but he was a professor of theology in a Presbyterian seminary, he said that our status has changed, but also our state as well. The power to forgive, the power to be cleansed, not just from the outside, but the inside. As our desires change, so do our lives are changed. Could have been motivated by fear. The Lord could have, just like on Mount Sinai, he brought the fear into the people of Israel. And he could have certainly been, done that by fear. But one of the things about fear is that fear, while it's a great motivator initially, it's not necessarily the best motivator long-term. What we need for long-term motivation is love. And so God chose us as again, William Barclay says, as Adam's sin is the cause of death, so Jesus' perfect goodness conquers death and gives a man life eternal. So again, Adam's sin causes death, but Jesus' perfect goodness, perfect dedication to the Father conquers death and gives us life eternal. When we think about the gospel, what do we think about? We think about those temptations that the devil had given the Lord there while he's fasting for 40 days in the wilderness. Again, the wilderness of Israel is a very bleak place. It's just rocky. There's nothing there, very little there. It's just not a very attractive place. It's also extremely hot. And so what does the gospel say? Well, he says, well, take these stones and make them bread. So again, it's rocky area. So he said, just take the stones, make them bread. What is that about? Well, sowing doubt. Well, if you're the Son of God, you can do this. So you don't need to be dependent upon anybody. Just go ahead and do it yourself. It's just like sowing the doubt that was there in Genesis with our first parents. So did the Lord tell you that you couldn't eat of any of the trees? That sowing that doubt that's there. And then he goes to the parapet of the temple, says, throw yourself down. And because after all, in Psalm 91, it says that the angels will guard you lest you dash your foot against a stone. So, float down like a feather and, like some kind of a Las Vegas magic act. And you certainly, especially back then, you would have gotten, thousands of people say, oh my gosh, look at that. Do it again, I'm going to go get, Uncle Sally, Uncle Joe and Aunt Sally. So come on over and do that, do that. So again, you would have had thousands of people, but that's not necessarily what the Lord wants. It's not the way he wanted to do it. He could have, had thousands of people following him, but instead, what did he do? He had those tough sayings that, that unless you, hate your very life, in comparison to me, you cannot be my disciple. And unless you hate even those good things that God has given you on this earth, you cannot be my disciple. Unless you take up your cross, you cannot be my disciple. So again, those hard sayings, the Eucharist, that unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. So he had all these hard statements because he wanted not just followers, but he wanted disciples. He wanted people who are willing not only to follow him, but also to listen to him, to learn from him, and to be inspired by him to go and to inspire others. So he didn't want just a whole bunch of followers. The other thing is the last thing that the devil does is that idea of compromise. Go look at look at all these kingdoms. I can give it to you all. You don't have to go to the cross. You don't have to, you can take the shortcut, just compromise, just do whatever you need to do, and you can have everything. And yet the Lord's not willing to do that. Worship God and God alone. And so the devil goes off. But really, when we think about our temptations, we think about that Jesus was tempted in all things but sin. And so one of the things that our life is that we think about, whether the devil uses playbook. I always say to the kids in the school, the devil doesn't have to develop new sins. The old ones work so well. So whether it be pleasure, pride, unforgiveness, all these other kind of things in our life, that the devil uses to tempt us, we need to then think about if we have fallen short of God's glory, and then come back to confession, come back to receive God's forgiveness, receive God's strengthening. So, not just a matter of receiving, his forgiveness, but also asking the Holy Spirit of God to help us in the midst of those temptations, help us in the midst of temptations of life, help us to give us the desire not to be changed just from the outside, but changed from the inside, so that our desires will change as well. Thanks. God bless.